So this is next generation insulation. I don't know what they did to change the formula to make it more insulated or make it the next generation, but I can promise you it itches just like all the previous generations. So with insulating my building, I'm going to be using two different types of insulation. I'm going to be using your typical fiberglass faced insulation, and I'm going to be using this Rockwool. So we've used both these types of insulation in a bunch of different projects, and we really like the Rockwool for the walls. There's some advantages and disadvantages to each type of insulation. So with your fiberglass insulation, you have this paper on the front. And what this does, this acts as a vapor barrier. And vapor barriers are very important depending on where you're at. So what your vapor barrier does is it keeps moisture from permeating in through your insulation and into your finished surface, which in this case would be drywall. So with this paper being here acting as a vapor barrier, moisture won't be able to make it through into the back of the drywall and start creating mold and other issues. So I'm going to be installing these insulation bats in the ceiling. These are 9 inches thick, and the reason I chose these is because I have 2x10s in the ceiling. Pretend these studs are the ceiling joists for a second. So what I'll do is I'll tuck the insulation up inside, and they have these little tabs to where you can either staple inside of the joist or inside the studs here, or you can staple it to the outside. So in some places, and you definitely want to check, sometimes it's code to actually glue the drywall to the studs, and so in that case you would absolutely have to staple inside of the stud or the joist. I like just putting the tab over the stud and stapling right to the stud. There's no requirement in my case. I'm not sure if the gluing at one point in time was just because people were using nails instead of screws, but with screws I've never had an issue attaching the drywall to the studs or to the ceiling joist and having the drywall come loose or even having screws pop out. So the Rockwool doesn't have a vapor barrier, so what I'm going to do is after I install this into the studs, then I'm just going to put 6mm plastic over the Rockwool and staple it into the studs. 6mm plastic is the minimum. It can go anywhere from 6mm up to 20mm. This is the packaging of that Rockwool insulation, just in case you wanted to go find it in the store. So we've used these throughout our house, just in different places. And some of the places were just used as soundproofing, so we would just stick this between the studs and we'd have a soundproof 2x4 wall, which helped out a lot. But we chose this Rockwool insulation for the metal building for a couple different reasons. One, it's fire resistant. Notice how I said fire resistant. It'll still melt a little bit, but you know, if you had a garage fire or something like that, you're going to be hard pressed to have this stuff go up just like any other type of insulation. And it's also moisture and mold resistant as well. You can see how the water just kind of beads up on top of it. This Rockwool insulation comes in 4-foot long pieces. They're 3.5 inches wide, just like the 2x4s. And they wedge in between 16-inch on center studs or ceiling or floor joists. So you cut this Rockwool insulation with this bread knife looking tool. So if you're coming up to a wire, what you can do, make a cut in the back. You can fit it right over your wire. This knife also makes it super easy to cut around outlets. For spaces that are less than 16 inches on center, I usually just set the piece up against the cavity and kind of follow the stud down and just make a kind of a rip cut along the insulation. This Rockwool insulation is really good for small places like this, because the vapor barrier is just going to cover up the entire wall. And you don't want to push any insulation, whether it's your typical fiberglass insulation or this Rockwool stuff, really tight. You want it to kind of be fluffy like a blanket. Using this Rockwool insulation is also going to be great because I have to fill in these small little cavities here. And I know there's going to be a couple cold spots with those braces. I know that. Please don't put it in the comments. So for the small space here, I just threw some Rockwool insulation in there because I'll be able to cover that up with the vapor barrier with the plastic. For the rest of the area, I'm actually going to put in the fiberglass insulation. Part of the reason I did this is because the Rockwool insulation is quite a bit heavier than the fiberglass insulation, so I'm just going to throw the fiberglass insulation in there. If you see the blue insulation up there, we tried something and we decided not to go that route, so that's why we're going this route. So the insulation I'm going to be putting on the ceiling, since I framed out my ceiling, my just small ceilings, 24 inches on center with 2x4s, I'm going to be using this R13 insulation, this face insulation. It's only 3.5 inches thick, so it'll be just right for the 2x4s up there. And I'm actually going to lay this R30 Unfaced insulation on top of it. So how this is going to work is I'm going to use this Unfaced insulation, I'm going to throw it in lengthwise, and it's going to give me 9 inches of insulation. And since this is unfaced, there's no vapor barrier between anything. And so then I'm going to put the face insulation in between the studs for the frame ceiling. And then that'll actually act as my vapor barrier. So there's no vapor barrier within a vapor barrier. The basic principle of vapor barriers is if you want to keep moisture out, but if moisture gets in, you want to be able to let it out. And so if you also have an attic that doesn't have enough insulation, you think, and you want to add more insulation, then what you'll do is you'll put that unfaced insulation, just lay it on top of the existing insulation. You definitely want to consider putting some duct tape over the plastic just to make one solid piece so any water vapor can't get through there. If it goes on the stud, I don't think it's as big of a deal, but definitely if it splits the stud, you definitely want to put some tape in there. If you don't feel comfortable using a knife around your panel box or any electrical outlets, make sure that you turn the power off to them. So that about does it for the vapor barrier. My father-in-law was available, so he helped me hang up some of this drywall on the ceiling, and that's what I want to hurry and get done next. So we appreciate you watching this video. We look forward to getting this drywall done. In fact, we kind of have to get it done because my daughter's birthday party is coming up at the end of February, so I'm hoping to hurry and get all this knocked out, get it finished, primed and painted, and it'll start looking like a finished building, kind of the way we want it to look, be like an extra family room away from the house. We appreciate everyone who has subscribed to our channel and look forward to the drywall video.